Where did you come from? Where did you go?
Well, did you come here by plane? Did you come here by ship? Or did you come here by submarine?
Submarine.
I decided to, join the Navy. Fully qualified with all my nuclear watch stations. Qualified some additional ones. Got my submarine warfare pin, so I got my Dolphins.
I actually watched a video. I think you sent it to me.
Yeah.
Of the ship maneuvering.
Department of Defense is pushing $1 trillion US a year in budget, and the US Navy's like.
Do you know how much Australia is spending?
I do not.
Okay. Because you're now in the greatest country.
Oh,
in
I know,
the world,
yeah,
right?
I know. But
you Yanks are always saying America. It's the greatest country in the world, but Australia, mate.
I completely agree. Australia is great and wonderful.
What sort of PPE do you need when working around?
The whole uniform.
Much like this?
Yeah, just like that.
Just like this.
Yeah, so this would be kind of similar to the PPE that we wear. These are Tyvek paint suits.
We call them sperm suits.
Yeah, sperm suits. Yeah, I mean, I don't understand. Welcome back to the Gold Room Podcast. I'm Mark Schneider. Thanks for having me, Josh.
Not a problem, mate. Thank you very much for doing the bloody introduction for us, and saves me a job. So that's awesome. Mate, we always start with the life and the times. Give us a little bit of where did you come from? Where did you go? Where
you come from? Hot Night, Joe. Yeah. All right. That's for my wife because she's a big music person. I'm kind of more the movie quoter, but yeah. So, we'll kind of start at the end.
Okay.
So how did I get to Australia? When you hear about my background, you're going to go, well, did you come here by plane? Did you come here by ship? Or did you come here by submarine? So I'm fresh off the sub, but I flew in here.
Mate, you stole that from me. I said that the other day.
Yeah, well, yeah, you did,
He was
of
like
course.
fresh off the boat. Jonathan Fisher was saying, he's fresh off the boat. And I was just like, Marky, you can use that. It's fresh off the sub, mate.
Yep, yeah, I stole it from you. But yeah, so my wife got the opportunity to come here to help support the AUKUS program. And so I took the leap of faith and ended up over here. And UBH Group was working on their big nuclear supply chain certification, and my CV hit their desk as we were dealing with that process, and that's how I ended up there. We'll talk more about that later.
Yeah, cool.
But so that's kind of how I got to Australia, because that's really what most of your audience is going to care about. How does this, American bloke, get over here, and what is, who is he? He's the chief nuclear officer. What the hell does that mean? So let's go. Now let's rewind back in time to the middle of the '90s, right? Because I'm that old now. Makes me cry. Yeah, so all right, it's the middle of the 90s. So Josh, you ever had a teacher that was that super resonated with you?
I sure did, mate. My enterprise teacher in the fourth form at Hamilton Boys High School.
Okay.
His name was Andrew Loader.
Yeah, awesome, right? So mine was my physics teacher, Mike Fitzgibbons. Mike, if you ever are listening to this, this is for you.
G'day, Mike.
So I was taking physics, and he showed us the chart of nuclides. Do you know what the chart of nuclides is?
No, mate, of course not.
You know what the periodic table elements are,
Of course
right?
I do, yeah. I can actually name a few.
Yeah, so periodic table elements is the chemistries, this is how chemistry works, right? You care about where they're physically located on the periodic table, because all the ones on the far left column kind of interact together. All the ones on the far right, are all the noble gases.
Yes.
So in the world of physics, we have the chart of nuclides, which is literally take every element that's on the periodic table and then stack them in this big giant stack that is based on the number of protons and the number of neutrons. So you get this big giant flow. So to give you an idea, there are 7 versions of hydrogen.
Yeah, wow.
So what the periodic table tells you is how these atoms move throughout based on whether they eject a proton an electron from their nucleus to become stable. This is how radiation or radioactivity occurs. And so you could see how they move up there. Everything wants to become steel, right? Or iron. Everyone wants to become iron. That's the most stable element is iron. And so it kind of shows how they all move and become that. And so it's super neat and super exciting. And the other thing that was really cool about it was alchemy is real. You can actually turn things into gold. And I thought that was super neat. Now we're talking on quantities that are so small that you wouldn't be able to appreciate it. So don't worry, gold mining is going to remain.
Oh, it'll remain, and it's going turbocharged.
Yeah, and the other thing is that if you use these transmutation, the physicist version or nuclear physicist version of alchemy, you're getting radioactive gold. Yeah. So then you wouldn't want to stick it in your pocket because
or wear it on your ring,
or wear it on your finger, right? And then you're unnecessarily giving yourself radiation. We will definitely, I'm sure, talk about radiation.
Definitely, mate.
So I thought that was super neat, super interesting. So I said I want to work in nuclear energy in some response.
At what age?
I was 16.
Wow, awesome.
So I just trying to figure out, right, I'm looking at different universities. I was looking at Berkeley, which has a test nuclear reactor, Reed College, which is in my home state of Oregon, in the United States. I had a nuclear reactor. I'm looking up in New York State. Anywhere that had a reactor for, it's much like the ones at ANSTO in Australia.
Yes.
Any of these little test reactors, I was looking at every university that had that. There's 12 public universities that have it, and there's
they have test reactors at
12,
the universities.
Yes, 12, and then there's also, I think, another half dozen private universities that have it as well.
That's fantastic.
So we have a whole fleet of test reactors in the United States as well. So I'm looking into that, and I was like, I just knew that's what I wanted to do. And of course, I'm 17 years old, and I want to, trying to figure out how to pay for university, right? Yep. University is expensive. I didn't want to stay in my home state of Oregon.
Why? Why not? What's wrong with Oregon?
Oregon's very anti-nuclear.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in 1991, through protests, and I had lots of teachers that were super excited about being on the protest that shut down our only operating nuclear reactor from a commercial perspective. So I didn't want to remain in Oregon because I felt that wasn't the right fit for me. Yeah.
Yep.
I happened to know the Navy recruiter personally. And so he showed up to my school one time, and I filled out his little sheet. It's kind of like here's a give me. Yep. Well, between my year 11 and year 12, junior year, senior year in high school for American speak, I get a phone call, and it's Petty Officer Steve Fosjord, and he goes, hey, Mark, he's going through his spiel. He's practically reading up sheet. I'm like, Steve, it's Mark.
We know each other.
We know each other, right? Let's talk like human beings, not talk like Navy recruiter in person. He goes,
cool.
And then he goes, hey, have you ever thought about joining the Navy? And me being the arrogant, smart-ass 17-year-old kid said, well, only if you have nuclear power. And he goes, boy, do I have a job for you.
Awesome.
At this time, I did not know that the U.S. Navy had nuclear power ships. At that time, we had cruisers, we had aircraft carriers, and we had submarines.
When was the first nuclear reactor used in a submarine?
1955, USS Nautilus made the famous words of underway on nuclear power.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And then, so that was super exciting. And fun fact is that the CEO of USS Nautilus was the commanding officer of USS Long Beach, the first nuclear-powered surface ship as well.
Wow.
Which was like right after he took that vessel, he took the Nautilus underway. He was on the Long Beach as the commanding officer.
Wow.
So that's
awesome.
So what's that? 70 years ago.
Yep.
I thought that was super exciting. So
you didn't know that the Navy had nuclear-powered ships?
Yeah, it just wasn't something that in school they talked about, right? Again, I went to an anti-nuclear place. They wouldn't want to tell us that, the U.S. Navy has nuclear-powered ships because nuclear is bad, right? That's their beliefs.
Yeah, for sure.
Obviously, I have a little differing opinion.
What about now? Sorry. What about now? What's Oregon's stance on nuclear energy now?
Oregon still has a ban that it's not a ban like Australia has. Australia has a pure ban on construction of commercial nuclear reactors. It was modified recently so that it could allow for the construction of nuclear-powered submarines here.
Yep.
Oregon has a ban in the form of if there's not a permanent repository, they cannot construct nuclear reactors. West Virginia, a very coal-heavy state in the eastern part of the United States. It's right up around Maryland and Virginia, right outside the capital of the United States in D.C. They had a similar ban, but they managed to repeal it recently.
Nice.
That's
promising.
Yeah. So I decided to join the Navy, and so 18-year-old Mark is getting yelled and screamed at in Chicago, Illinois for a few months, getting transformed from that young smart-ass kid
went behind the ears.
Yeah, to a young smart-ass sailor, because nothing changes. I did change, more confidence, right? Anybody who joins any kind of military defense force, right? Your basic training or boot camp, whatever the term is, anywhere. It really does mature you in a lot of ways. Teaches you, how to walk right, how to talk, how to interact with people that are in a professional manner. And taught me basic, life-saving skills, basic, sea handling, right? Your seamanship.
Yeah.
So it was definitely really cool. And then from there, I went to Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston, South Carolina is the home of the United States' nuclear training program.
Yep, and I think it's also Michael Jordan's home state basketball college, right?
I am not sure about that.
I think so. Someone's going to pull me up on
Yeah,
it. I could be wrong. I think so. I think so.
I think he was. I thought he was UNC.
Yeah, I thought it started in Charleston. I could be
Could
wrong.
be. Yeah,
I could be wrong.
And there's like there's lots of cities named Charleston.
Is there?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I know there's Charleston, West Virginia as well.
Okay.
So I ended up in Charleston, South Carolina. Went through my first phase of training, which was 6 months long, to become an electronics technician. So in the U.S. Navy, there's 3.5 flavors of technicians, and then you have your officers.
Yep.
So there's electronics technicians, there's electricians, and then there's mechanics or machinist mates. And then the mechanics.
So the machinists above electricians?
So we're all equals.
Oh, okay, great.
We're all equals.
Okay, great.
So there's, so the electronics technicians, they operate the equipment that the instrumentation to control the electronics, that monitor the reactor, and the watch stations, they qualify, monitor that electronics, and they actually the ones who are physically controlling the switches that are on the reactor to control the reactor itself.
Wow.
The electricians, they monitor the electrical equipment. So they operate the electric plant on older submarines. They were the throttlemen, so the ones that actually controlled ship speed. Wow. Now that's been incorporated into the ET's jobs. They've physically merged those two watch stations into one. And then the mechanics, they run all the mechanical equipment. So inside the control room, you typically have an ET and 2 EMs or an ET and 1 EM, and then you have the officer that's supervising it. And then the mechanics, they're running around, so they're monitoring the turbines, they're monitoring, they're starting up your air conditioning units, they're operating your main condenser, they're operating pumps, all that good stuff. So they all work together. The running joke is that if there's a problem, everyone points at someone else.
Oh, that's everywhere.
Right.
That's mining.
Yeah. It's everywhere, right? So like if we had this fault in the steam oil control system, the ETs are pointing at the mechanics, the mechanics are pointing at the electricians to figure out who the problem is. Yeah. And then ultimately we all end up getting screwed. So, and when I said 3.5 is that there's a portion of the mechanics that they get to go through some extra training later on to become radiation and chemistry experts. We call them ELTs, engineering laboratory technicians. So that's the first phase of training. ET training is about 26 weeks. EM training is about 24 weeks, and mechanic training is about 13 weeks.
Okay.
And then after that, we all literally from one side of the building in Charleston, we go to the other side of the building, and that's for nuclear power school. That's where the officers come in. So it's like 3 floors. The top floor is all the officers, and then the first and second floor are all of us, people who actually do real work.
Yeah.
And then, and that's just, it's the classroom portion of nuclear power training. Awesome. So it talks about reactor physics, it talks about heat transfer fluid flow. There are some certain things that are focused on your rate. So like you have your, electronics, nuclear electronics for electronics technician. And so ours is much more in depth than the nuclear electronics for machinist mates.
Okay.
So so we each have all our courses. There's chemistry, there's materials, all sorts of different courses you work, and that's 26 weeks long. And then after that, we get split. Half the class remain. It's changed now, and I'm not as smart as it used to be because they've different number of reactors. I've been retired from the Navy for, coming up on 7 years now. So when I was in, half the class went up to New York, Ballston Spa, upstate near Albany, to operate prototype reactors. So there are reactors that are built that are the prototypps for sea-based reactors. So there was the SHG reactor, and then there was, we called it MARF. I don't remember what MARF stands for, but by the way, SHG stands for Submarine Eighth Generation General Electric. So S Submarine 8 for the 8th generation of the design being built, so the G being General Electric. That matters. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, later on.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll get to talking about other things. So half the class went up. The other half remain in South Carolina. There's a different part of the base where they have converted old submarines into training reactors.
Wow. Awesome.
So they take our old submarines and they basically fuel them. They do some upgrades to them. So it was the Sam Rayburn and the Daniel Webster, which are old boats. They were S5W design, so submarine 5th generation Westinghouse.
So are they sitting in the water?
Yeah.
Or are they are?
Yeah, they're sitting in the Cooper River.
Yeah, okay, cool.
And they've been replaced with the ex-USS La Jolla and the ex-USS San Francisco. So San Francisco made big news in the early 2000s by running into that underwater mountain in transit from Australia to Guam.
No, didn't know.
Yeah,
Didn't hear about it.
I mean, it's crazy. So they literally cut off the front of it, and they put the front of the USS Honolulu, which was decommissioned, on it because it was
Wow.
cheaper. It was more cost effective to keep it than to try and
So no catastrophic damage.
Oh no! Like if you look, like literally crumpled the front end.
Really?
Like I mean, there was a sailor that died, and it was an unfortunate accident. Like 60% of the crew had head and neck injuries. I mean, it was.
Really?
Oh yeah, it's crazy. I mean, like you can like the pictures of it are absolutely crazy.
What was the sub name?
It was the USS San Francisco. Yeah. So the San Francisco is now a moored training ship. So I was on the Sam Rayburn for my training. So 6 months, and it's self-paced. So there's some little bit of classroom portion that's kind of now you learned a generic reactor. Now we're going to learn this reactor.
Yeah.
So you have to learn like what is the volume of this tank. And by the way, you're sitting in a classroom with when you start out the first 6 weeks, you're sitting in the same classroom as guys. Like you're going to split up into two groups. 2 go to the 626, 2 go to the 635. Those are the whole numbers, by the way. And this tank on the 626 is, say, 10. We use gallons. I'm sorry.
That's fine. It's fine.
I think we also use goat bladders too for volume. So it might be, say this one is 10,186 gallons if you're on the 626, and then it's 10,193 gallons on the 635. So you actually have to know, and these are like things you have to report, they have to like regurgitate on tests.
Yep.
So the tests are actually by plant design even, to give you kind of the little viewport into what it's like. So I did my training there. And so, then 19-year-old me, because I graduated before, but it's self-paced. So I actually was complete in about 4 months. So it's 26 weeks, about 6 months, right? I was complete in about 4 months with everything because I was a hard charger and I loved it. And I love nuclear energy, as you can tell.
Yeah, for sure.
So I qualified. I had 2 months where I was standing watch like a staff member, but I couldn't have a student under me. So like if they needed, like if they didn't have many students, like, hey, we're going to put, ET3 Schneider on the watch bill as the machinery to upper level watch, or we're going to put him on as a reactor operator or on as throttleman, because there's no student there. So we would rather not stand watch. We'll make the puke that just got qualified, stand watch. So, so I had 2 months learning how to basically stand watch without students or without, being an instructor. I was literally the guy.
Awesome.
And then
daunting? Was it daunting? Or you just frothed over it? You loved it?
I mean, you just do it. I mean, that's your job, right? Like, I mean, the first couple of times you're definitely, concerned, but you've managed these operations. We have, it's the nuclear community is called the aviation community. So we have if you go to the U.S. flight training for the Air Force, they have mock-up training cockpits that they can sit in and they can run through all their checklists. We call them casualty procedures in the Navy for if there's some kind of thing. And we have full panels that we can turn around and we can, operate and practice operating without being able to actually operate it. We have an actual simulator there, so it's literally just like the aviation industry from that regards. And we use the same type of things. They call it check rides. We call them finally evaluated watches. They call them maneuvers. We call them practical factors. So we have all these things. They call them ground exams. We call them exams, right? Yep. So the U.S. nuclear industry said, hey, the aviation industry does this well. Yep. We'll steal from that. We'll just change the words because that's what we do, right?
For sure.
You can copy the homework, but
that's what everybody does.
You can copy the homework, but you got to change a couple things, right? Yeah. So there I went to USS Michigan, and I was just a reactor operator, got all my quals. So when you may be a fully qualified operator, but then when you show up, it's like you're a nub. Yep. NUB stands for non-useful body. Oh, really? You're an air-breathing, water-drinking, flick-burning, non-useful person.
Is that what they're yelling at you?
Oh yeah. It's nonstop, and like you're not like it's part of the. I don't want to use the word hazing because that's not the right word to describe it. But part of it is that when you're the new guy, you got to prove yourself, right? Yep. We in the submarine community rely on everyone. Everyone's got to be there. You got to expect, everyone to be able to. There's no on bigger surface ships in the United States Navy, they've got, damage control experts. Like they manage the fire teams, they run all that. That's us. There's no replacement. Like I was qualified in navigation stuff. I had the mechanics were qualified torpedo handling, right? So we constantly are working back and forth, and we it's just one crew, right, doing everything. So I went there. I got fully qualified with all my nuclear watch stations, qualified some additional ones, got my submarine warfare pin. So I got my dolphins, as we call it. It's the mahi fish, mahi, which is the dolphin fish. Yeah. Whereas on the U.S. submarine warfare pin, Australian submarine warfare pin is literally dolphins, which I think is pretty interesting, the difference between them. Yeah. And then, so I took USS Michigan in for her overhaul and conversion. So she was a ballistic missile submarine. Now she's a guided missile submarine.
What's the difference between a ballistic missile and a guided missile?
Ballistic missile, that's the ones that end the world. Guided missile are end individual countries, if we so desire. So, no ballistic missile submarine has ever fired a weapon in anger. And I remember when USS Ohio fired her first weapon in anger. I was on shore duty on an instructor tour. That was a big celebration because she was, killing the bad guys type thing. Yeah. And the differences also range. Ballistic missile, we can essentially hit anywhere on the planet from anywhere on the planet. Guided missile, you got to get, close. Yeah, okay. Close from a missile standpoint. Yep. Still quite a ways away.
Intercontinental ballistic missile.
Yep, ICBM, yep.
That's it.
So after I left there, I went to USS Alabama. Have you seen the movie Crimson Tide with Gene Hackman?
I sure have,
So that's the submarine featured in that.
Wow.
So I was on the USS Alabama. There I was the leading petty officer for Reactor Controls Division. So I had a chief that I worked for. I was basically his principal deputy, working on all that, managing about 10 sailors, with managing their watch stations, making sure I'm coordinating with the watch book coordinator to make sure the right one. And so I did that, which was awesome.
How long were you at sea for during these times?
Because those submarines have two crews, we typically did about 80 to 90 days at sea, and then we'd come in for about the boat would be in for about 6 weeks, turned over to the other crew would take it out. We'd go into a training period.
3 months on, 6 weeks off.
For the submarine. Yeah. And then
it's a hell of a roster.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, and understanding that those are the best maintained boats in the United States Navy. Yep. Sorry, rephrase that. Those are the best maintained vessels in the United States Navy. They get dry dock like every second or third upkeep period. Like the amount of maintenance they get is just insanity.
Awesome. You want to keep those in tip-top condition, don't you?
Yeah, there's not to get into that because that's a very U.S. thing. Yep. Australians don't need to worry about that. Yeah. Fun fact about the movie Crimson Tide is that you see Gene Hackman's character wear a red ball cap. Yeah. So while the film crew, or while the Hollywood crew was underway, they thought he was wearing it to stand out. What they didn't know is that there was a whole group of sailors running around with red hats in the engine room, because red hats on board a submarine is your drill team. So they're running drills pretending the reactor is broken, and they're providing indications.
Oh, really?
And when you wear the red hat, you're invisible. And then you take the red hat off. That means you can communicate. So the idea is that when you're providing indications, you're making sure that they're taking their actions, or if they're going to take an action, you want them to simulate it, right? So you literally have you're going to shut these valves. Like, I don't want them to actually shut that valve because that would actually put us in a legit crisis. Here, pretend to shut this valve, and so you run through
simulations.
Simulations with using an actual nuclear reactor.
Shoot. Wow.
And understanding that the U.S. has the best nuclear record on the planet, with the longest operations, as well as zero accidents.
Yep. Zero accidents?
Zero accidents.
Great. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So from there, I went to Trident Training Facility. I was an instructor. I taught some electronics courses. One was on an electrical test equipment. I didn't care much for being an instructor then. I didn't really jive too much. So I said, hey, I would volunteer and go carry a rifle. And I went and I did a deployment in 2007, carrying a rifle, supporting the United States Army.
Wow.
I'm the only combat.
Iraq?
My unit was in Iraq. They left me behind in Kuwait.
Really?
Yeah, to coordinate, because you take a guy like me that somewhat able to talk. I think I'm pretty smart, and so I was able to communicate. That's actually probably has been, from a communication perspective, has been very important, because communicating with the U.S. Army, U.S. Navy, U.S. Air Force, U.S. Marines, Royal Air Force, the British Army, so a whole bunch of different countries and all that was really helpful. And I love telling this joke because I think this is a great way, is that if you tell the 4 big services of the United States to secure a building, you're going to get 4 very different responses.
I can imagine.
You tell the United States Army, they're going to set up a perimeter around the building. No one's going to get in and out of that area. That building is secure. You tell the United States Marine Corps, they're going to storm that building, kill everyone inside of it. It's their new headquarters. They've secured the building. You tell the U.S. Navy to secure a building, they're going to turn off the coffee pot, dump it out, wash it. They're going to turn the lights off, make sure the blinds are closed, lock the door, the building is secured.
Sounds like an electrical crib room.
Yeah. And then you tell the U.S. Air Force they're going to get a 5 years lease with an option to buy. So I think that was a big thing, was learning that there's different ways to communicate.
Yep.
So that was, here I am mid-career. So that was 7-8 years being able to do that. I came back. I'd made chief petty officer going into that tour, and then I crossed into the limited duty officer. So I went and I had my spine removal surgery on November 1st, 2008. I got commissioned as an ensign through the Navy's limited duty officer program. So limited duty officer means that whatever your enlisted career path determines your officer career path. So I had to work in nuclear power. From there, I went to work at Newport News Shipbuilding for the Naval Reactors Field Office. So Naval Reactors is our regulator. So we literally take guys that have operated nuclear reactors and we tell them, hey, you know where the skeletons are. Yep. Go look for the skeleton in all these other boats. One caveat, you're not allowed to find the skeletons that you created.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So now that being said, is that definitely when I was at Newport News and we grabbed a newly commissioned ensign off of the aircraft carrier that's in for her overhaul, he definitely told us where all the skeletons were so that we knew where to look. Yep. But yeah, so part of it is that understanding and being able to figure out all that stuff. Know where the skeletons are, know how to find them.
But then also learn from those.
Yes.
Learn from those mistakes and develop systems or procedures or functional parts.
Really letting the ship know that these are not acceptable processes,
yep.
And then they can work on that, right? So as the regulator, we don't. If we're telling you what to do, it means we're taking the keys to your reactor. You can't play with it. Yep. So here, our job is to bring up these issues, they self-correct and get better at. And that's the way that regulations work, right? Is that the regulator doesn't come in and tell CTL how to do their work. They say, hey, this doesn't, this is a non-compliance, right? And you're not in compliance.
No one's saying that around here, mate.
No, I'm not. But that's what they're doing, right?
Yeah,
if they come in and they do an audit, right, and they say, here are your non-compliances, here are your opportunities for improvement, things like that, right?
Most definitely.
Right. And that's the goal is that we want CTL to improve their processes. We don't want to direct you to your processes because you own it when you do it yourself. And that's why you take experts and you bring them in there. As AUKUS is developing, AUKUS, for those who don't know, is the Australian, United Kingdom, U.S. partnership to get defense capabilities between the 3 nations. Pillar 1 is specifically about nuclear-powered submarines, under Australian.
It's a good step for Australia.
It is. I mean, I think it is from there's a lot. We will probably unpackage that later. What is great about AUKUS from an Australian perspective, from how it's more about this benefits the U.S. and U.K. Their industrial support more than than Australians I think understand. Yep. So after I did my time at Newport News at the regulatory office, I went to the USS Abraham Lincoln. Shout out to my hat, aircraft carriers. So there are not enough.
Is that the largest in the fleet?
So it's the nuclear powered aircraft carriers all about the same. It's about 100,000 tons each. 4.5 acres.
100,000 tons
each. Yeah.
Wow.
And we've got 11 of them. There's a great mandatory fun day video about aircraft carriers that I encourage everyone to watch, talking about how U.S. aircraft carriers pull into foreign countries.
I actually watched a video, I think you sent it to me, of the ship maneuvering in the ocean. It was going bloody quick.
Yeah,
And it was turning on a dime.
that was the USS Abraham Lincoln. It was actually the very end of my career after I had left. She had done her overhaul and she was doing her post overhaul sea trials. And so they actually physically put up barriers and guards so that you can't go onto the elevators.
Wow.
So you can't get too close, but you can literally like pull the matrix maneuvers where you're leaning back.
Really?
When it's doing it, like you're doing the turn and you're looking at the water because it's just leaning so hard. We don't normally operate the ships like that. Definitely not with aircraft on board. So
Defensive maneuvering.
yeah, definitely, yeah. And if you're maneuvering like that, you got aircraft strapped down.
Yep.
Typically, we don't like to go more than 2 degrees, but they can definitely go like 15-degree turns. It's pretty impressive. So I worked for Surrey Power Station for about 3 years. And then I decided I wanted to change of pace. My wife and I were on the verge of buying a beach house.
You've got a funny, quite a nerdy name for your beach house.
Yes, yeah. So
what is it?
It's Gone Fission, Fission, with someone catching a lithium atom. Because again, my wife and I are nerdy nuclear engineers.
Your wife's a nuclear engineer, isn't she?
Yes, yeah. So we met on board the USS California while she was under construction. So she was a mechanical test engineer.
Oh, cool.
So we have a nuclear love story. We have the nerdiest pillow talk on the planet.
Have you got any children?
We have a combined number. We have a combined total of 6 children.
What?
We're hers, mine, and ours family.
Cool.
So I came in with 3. She adopted my daughter from my first marriage.
Nice.
She came in with her son, who's a Marine now.
Oh, cool.
And then we have 2 together, and our 2 daughters from our marriage. So I decided to throw my hat or my name in the ring for some federal positions that were coming up within the United States military. I got hired on within the U.S. government. I got hired on by the U.S. Coast Guard as an electrical engineer, working in command and control of communication systems.
Wow.
So I was doing that. I mean, it was great. I owned all long range communication systems for non-aviation assets within the Coast Guard. So I mean, I had satellite comms. HF radios. It was just, I got to do some really neat stuff. There's some really cool stuff.
A little step up from the ham radio.
A little step up from that. Yeah. But it's really interesting because people ask me, how has that helped you with what you're doing now as a chief nuclear? I've said, well, actually, the Australian Defence Force and the U.S. Coast Guard have behaviors that are more similar than the U.S. Navy has. U.S. Navy has the biggest budget of the major, departments within the Department of Defense. Department of Defense is pushing $1 trillion U.S. a year in budget, and the U.S. Navy's like pushing 400, billion of that, right?
Wow.
So they're kind of a throw money at the issue.
Do you know how much Australia's spending?
I do not.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not.
I'm going to find that out.
Yeah, I know that the U.S. Coast Guard, on the other hand, so the U.S. Navy has like 300,000 sailors. The U.S. Coast Guard has like 50,000 when you include the auxiliary and the reserves that they have, and all their civilians, right? So it's not a very big service, and their budget is about the cost of one of these nuclear aircraft carriers, their annual budget. So whereas the U.S. Navy's like, oh, we've got 11 of these things, the Coast Guard's like, oh my God, we need money. We're trying to manage a fleet of 150 cutters plus as others with, literally shoestring budgets. So they're constantly they're worrying about money. And so I see that with the ADF. And so it's really helped me with kind of managing, right? I know that, not to make this political, but we're going to the caretaker periods, right? How do we manage as companies? Well, the U.S. Navy, the Coast Guard has those same kind of budgetary things. How do I not spend money? How do I spend money? How do I so it gets very much along the lines of that. Whereas U.S. Navy's like, money's coming no matter what. We know it's coming. We're just going to spend it. And I mean, there was some dealings with, continuing resolution and all that, not to get into U.S. politics, but having to manage all that. But really, it felt very benign from a Navy perspective. Other than I might lose some paychecks for a while.
Yep.
But from a Coast Guard perspective, like we don't get money, we don't get fuel, we can't get our ships out to sea.
Yep.
It's a very different, thought process, and I feel that the Australian Defence Force is more in line with the Coast Guard, and that's really helped me, I think, give the context as needed as I'm dealing with some of the support efforts for UBH. And then so my wife got the opportunity to come out to support the work that's going on with AUKUS, with her company. And so I took the leap of faith. And then while she was out here on one of her trips.
Were you worried before you left? Well, not worried to follow your wife, but were you thinking, I've got such an amazing job here. I'm enjoying what I do. What's there going to be for me in Australia?
So when my wife presented the opportunity, have you thought about, she goes, hey, would you ever consider moving to Australia? This is the exact quote from me. Let's see, I'm trying to make sure, trying to remember how to write it. Was
because you're now in the greatest country.
Oh,
in
I
the
know,
world,
yeah,
right?
I know. But
you Yanks are always saying America. It's the greatest country in the world, but Australia, mate, beats your hands down.
Yeah. So my initial thing was, well, that's not going to fucking happen. And after about 5 days, I started, but because I had a great opportunity, right? I was a GS-14 on a big pay scale of 15. Like, pension is coming at age 60.
You'll still get your pension, right?
I get my military pension, but I will not get my pension from my work with the Coast Guard because I was a federal employee, so I was a civilian. Okay. So that's gone. So that was the big thing.
Do you know what, mate? You're going to have 9 months of the year of a blue sky.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
No.
Like,
so
I mean, I completely agree. Australia is great and wonderful. In fact, actually, we're told in Navy boot camp, like literally, like we get the stories of our drill instructors that tell us about all the different port calls they've been on. But there's just, they all talk about they're great and they're arguing over what is the great. Anybody's been to Australia? Like, first off, Australia is the best port calls. Like, it's not like you combine all the great parts of every other port call and they're still shit compared to Australia.
Yeah, awesome.
Right? Like, so and understanding that, like, the Navy literally teaches us that Australia is wonderful and we love Australia.
Cool.
So, yeah, I mean, I do want to, it took me a while to realize that, hey, there is a great opportunity here. So I decided I was going to take a leap of faith with my wife. We came out
October.
Well, yeah, we came out in September 1st to do some house hunting, and I saw cloud in the sky, one cloud in the week.
That's a rarity.
Yeah, I mean, one, right?
Yeah.
One little tiny, not like a big giant. No, it was one little tiny cloud.
Yep.
In the 8 days we were here. But what's interesting is that my wife had met Jazz Diab. I know that you had Jonathan on. He mentioned all the stuff about Jazz and myself.
Yeah, she seems like a wonderful woman.
Yeah,
very intelligent.
She is. Yeah,
passionate.
Wonderful, passionate, intelligent. She's Miss Pregnant Australia,
I
Nuclear
did see
Australia.
that. She just got the sash like the other day.
So I'd met Jazz. She'd said, "Hey, send me your CV," and so I sent her my CV. We'd had a couple of chats. She sent it off to a couple people. She sent it off to this guy named Jeff Batten, and Jeff reaches out to me and says, "Hey, we'd love to get a meeting." And I go, okay. And he sends me a meeting invite. And me being the stupid American, did not realize that Australia was in the future. So I missed the first meeting because I was on the wrong day. So they were gracious enough to have the meeting the next day based on what I thought the day was. And I met Greg Underwood, Jeff Batten, and Dave Herbertson, which, if you notice, those last names happen to be U, B, and H. They're the founders of the company. So they founded the company in 2020, and they're a bunch of nerds. They're all special forces guys, communications guys.
Cool.
And they don't realize how nuclear nerdy they are when they created their company.
Coming up with their own jokes.
They are. So UBH, if you were to go back to your periodic table, and you remember those weird elements that have like the 3 letters that are like above 100 and all that?
You're taking me like 25 years back to high school.
But there's like the weird, like they're theoretical elements. They haven't been proven to exist yet.
Vaguely.
Yeah. So UBH on the periodic table is owned by Hexium, which is theoretical element 126. So it just happens to work their initials. Also happens to work with the fact that they were in the 126 Special Forces Regiment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like the
it all
layers.
ties in.
Yeah,
it all ties in.
And then it's like, and then they decide they're chatting with Jazz, and they're like, hey, we see AUKUS, we see this nuclear capability. We're thinking about getting our ISO 19443 nuclear supply chain certification. And they're working with Jazz, and they said, hey, we're gonna take the leap of faith, right? So as my wife is asking me to take the leap of faith, and I'm telling her there's no fucking way, UBH is going, we're gonna take this leap of faith. into nuclear. So they take the leap, right? So I'm not even a blip on their radar. So Jazz was a classmate at the military academy with these three fine gentlemen, and sends them my CV, and then the rest is history. They hired me on as their chief nuclear officer. It's been a great, they're letting me run. I was like, hey, I want to help support nuclear for Australia. I'm not, saying whether or not Australia should be for or against nuclear. That's for Australians to decide. Yep. But I'm here as a technical expert. Here's a subject matter expert to tell about nuclear, talk about nuclear, to debunk the myths that are getting put out there.
What do you think are some of the biggest myths out there?
One of the biggest ones, and this is one that really,
do you have a top three?
So the number one is that no radiation is good for you. And I think that one...
We know that's not true.
Well, we do, but I've had not one, not two, but like dozens of people bring that up to me, right? To include down in Cali, to include, it's something that's brought up.
If you know someone who's been affected by cancer.
Yes. Yes. Well, and then they say, well, the radiation is different, right? So the number one is, well, it's all radiation is bad. I'm like, well, I have this bottle of water here. This bottle of water contains H2O. There's 7 forms of hydrogen.
Yep.
Some of those forms of hydrogen is hydrogen-3, which is tritium, right? Tritium is generated inside of nuclear reactors. This is the big constituent everybody's concerned about, the water at Fukushima. It's also created in the upper ionosphere. It literally rains tritium on us.
Wow.
So and that tritium is radioactive. It's going to, after a certain period of time, I don't have all, 100 some odd elements and all their different, isotopes memorized. But, after some period of time, and it's a relatively long, I think maybe like 3 to 5 years, that tritium is going to release an electron from its nucleus and become a helium-3 atom. So knowing that, right, understanding how that works, right, that if you eat a banana, you're going to get more radiation than you would living next to a nuclear power station for a year.
Yep.
That one banana, right, one banana, that's how much radiation, because it contains potassium-41. Potassium-41 is radioactive. Yep. And understanding what radiation, how radiation is. So that was the big one is, number one, any radiation is bad. That's the first one. The second one I've heard is that I hear a lot is that, the radiation is different. And I go, well, again, let's go back to that cancer thing. Well, one of the biggest constituents used for cancer is cobalt-60. Cobalt-60, and we're talking, when someone gets cancer in a tumor, they're going to inject like hundreds of thousands of millisieverts worth of radiation into that. I've received 10 millisieverts of radiation in my 23-year nuclear career. Yep. They're going to receive huge quantities of radiation from cobalt-60. Of the 10 millisieverts I've received over 23 years, estimating, because I don't have it down, but based on most of my work's been done with shutdown reactors, it's about 7.5 of that is from cobalt-60. Cobalt-60 emits the same energy gamma ray, whether it's coming from a nuclear reactor or whether it's coming from the cancer treatment. It's the same energy gamma ray. That's why that is used. So I think that's the second biggest one. The third biggest one is that I hear that nuclear reactors are thirsty, and I'm like, I know there's a plan to, like, these are the 7 sites we're going to put where coal plants are, and the thing is that this is how a nuclear reactor works. I take a hot rock to boil water that makes steam, that makes a turbine go roundy that causes an arky-sparky. Yep. Right?
That's really good.
Yep. A coal plant uses a hot rock to boil steam. Yep. To, make a turbine go roundy to cause an arky-sparky. The difference is whether I burn coal or whether I break atoms. That's the difference between them, right? Now, is there more physical water within a nuclear reactor? Yes, but they're closed-loop systems. I can reprocess that water. I mean, it's not, the losses are very low, and when you actually look at the maintenance standards necessary to maintain a nuclear reactor compared to a coal plant from a steam plant side, which is, they're essentially identical, there is less steam leaks inside a commercial reactor, meaning that I don't have to make up that water loss, meaning that the nuclear reactor is actually less thirsty, to use the term that I've heard. Yep. Now, there is a water volume you have to make up for the others, so you could even say maybe it's a wash, but either way, it's like, okay, what are you using for your heat sink? That was a big question brought up as colleagues. Well, we use the water from the mining process. And I'm like, so there's a source of water coming in, right? Now, I'm not saying that Kali is the right answer, But what I'm saying is that this water comes. Well, that water. We're allowed to use that water because we're in mining.
Do you think that they should consider a desalination plant that coincides with the build of a nuclear power station?
I mean, yes. I think that's just smart because you can use your waste heat. Because a Carnot steam engine, which is what a coal plant, which is what a nuclear plant, which is what, even some of these solar, the concentrated solar, they just use molten salts, which there's molten salt reactors.
Yep.
For nuclear, but they all use a Carnot steam cycle, which is just a heat engine. So you have to waste about 60% of your energy. And you can use that waste heat. You see the big cooling towers, which, by the way, out in Morwell, there's 6 giant cooling towers. There's no nuclear. You see all the ones we talk about in the pictures in, the Simpsons and all that. You see the cooling towers. By the way, those are coal plants. The most famous anti-nuclear book in the world actually has a coal plant on the cover, not a nuclear plant.
Really?
Yeah.
Didn't think that one through.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, but that's. You say everyone see the towers and they think coal plant. It's just a method of the water vapor coming off. But you could use that water vapor. You could say you're using seawater. That water vapor comes off. You actually have water dripping down. You could collect that water.
Yep.
You would have more vapor come off in that process because part of the efficiency of it is actually having that water drip down. But if you're using, say, the Indian Ocean, which is right there, if you put it on the side, so maybe the answer isn't to put it at Kali, but to put it on the coast. Where you have this abundant giant ocean. By the way, all my submarines and the aircraft carriers served on, they use the ocean, sometimes the Indian Ocean, as our cooling medium. But it doesn't matter. I think the other thing is that people think nuclear reactors require clean water, whereas
It's not true.
it's not. You're right. It's not true. And in fact, Palo Verde uses literal shit. They use the runoff from Phoenix, so it's the wastewater from Phoenix, even treated sewage as their cooling power, as they're cooling my cousin.
Or the grey water.
Yeah.
Arizona.
Yeah, gray water and treated black water.
Yep.
So I mean, and I have a cousin and her husband that worked out there. They both retired from Palo Verde. So I mean, yeah, it's just interesting, from that.
What about waste? What about waste?
So so waste, that's always a good question, right? Everyone thinks about the volume. So if you took all the waste, 70 years of nuclear operations.
70?
70, yeah, 70. Years of nuclear operation, it would fit in a Bunnings.
Yeah. A large Bunnings.
A large Bunnings, yeah. I mean, and then when you look at
that was for 25% of the US
20% of the U.S. Well, 20% of the U.S. energy consumption
over 70 years.
Yeah. Now, if you go back into the 80s, nuclear was about 40% of our energy. So as the power demand has gone up and the U.S. has failed to build new nuclear reactors, it's dropped down to 20%.
Why is the Americans stop building nuclear reactors?
So it's a multifaceted issue. So one of the big things is that when you if you actually look around the United States, there's enough sites that construction had started were licensed for construction for an additional 100 reactors. In the 1970s and 80s, the nuclear industry was taking off. And nuclear actually they were building them so fast and so cheap that they were driving the price of power down to the point where it was becoming too expensive to operate the nuclear reactors.
Okay.
So, and when you look at the way that, everyone, the other one is the ramping issue that people talk about. So when you look at the reactors of the 80s, their capacity factor is at 60%. Now it's at 95% because they were ramping them with the grid. So as, peak demand, they were ramping up. At low demand, they were ramping down, right? So they were matching the grid. So if you actually look, where I lived out in Southeast Virginia, Surrey Power Station was the power source for most of the power in that area, and they just coordinated with the grid, and they were just treated like a coal plant, like a gas plant, like they just matched the grid. And nuclear plants are capable of doing that. So that was part of the issue was that they were building so quickly. And then when you get in the issue of 3 Mile Island, so 3 Mile Island really did a number is that they had to reevaluate the whole industry because while 3 Mile Island has a meltdown. One of the common statements within the U.S. commercial nuclear industry Three Island was the one that had the meltdown, but it wasn't probably the worst when it came to their operations, how they operated, and their safety culture. And so the U.S. then ramped up huge amounts of regulations and all that. Now, many of those regulations are needed.
Yep.
But I think that the U.S., the pendulum swung way too far with that. So, and then when you look at, so we put this big giant pause on construction. And then when you get to the construction of Vogtle Units 3 and 4, we hadn't finalized the design before we started, breaking ground. So they had to, the regulators forcing design changes, and it just
blew the cost out.
Yeah.
Doubled, and from up to 15 billion.
Yeah, 15 a unit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's supposed to be about 10 a unit, and now it blew up about 15 a unit.
And double the time.
Yes, and then
Double the time frame. That's something that I think, and I think I spoke to John. I don't think we spoke about it on the show, but I spoke to Jonathan Fisher afterwards. I think about what happens when one government comes in, starts kicking some goals, and then the next government comes in and just starts throwing some more paperwork, additional paperwork. Is that going to slow something down to the point where it just stops? Because that's one thing that you don't want to happen.
Yeah, and the other thing that's a challenge is going back to Newport News Shipbuilding. So Newport News Shipbuilding, when the USS George H.W. Bush was the last of the Nimitz-class aircraft carriers, when it left the dry dock 12, and all the way in the North Yard, the first superlift of the Gerald R. Ford got put in place.
Yep.
Right, so they went from building brand new aircraft carriers, literally Nimitz class design. They built them, going from Gerald R. Ford's presidency. He spoke at the commissioning of USS Nimitz. To now the ship class named after him, and they're putting the first modules in there. And the Gerald R. Ford it was supposed to be $12 billion. It went 50% over budget. It took an additional year and a half, right? So you've got an experienced shipbuilder. We're building a brand new class of ship. Yeah, and a prime example of that was before the former Secretary of Navy said, hey, I'm going to jump step and double our submarine production without working with the industrial base, without working with the shipbuilders. Say, we're going to use magic to adjust our submarine construction from 1 a year to 2 a year without any kind of ramp plan.
Yep.
The U.S. was delivering Virginia-class submarines 9 months ahead of schedule and 90% of budget. Yep. That's huge. Those are nuclear reactors. They're complex machines. They're factory built. Not saying that you can necessarily do that with commercial reactors, but when you have a continual design build, you continuously build. You build the same reactors over and over again. I don't know, like South Korea does.
Yep.
You may be building them, domestically, building them internationally. You have the ability to
They're more commercialized, aren't they?
Yes. The U.S. has the opportunity, specifically with the AP1000s, which are the design that is in Vogtle. They built the two down there. There's discussions about bringing back online the construction of VC Summer 2 and 3. So they were building those in pair. They built 4 of them in China. So there is discussions. Now, the ones in China were built on budget and within schedule, mostly. That's also because they don't have the same regulatory burden.
That's exactly right. I was just about to say that.
Yeah. And on top of it, in the U.S., you have the regulatory burden not just from the federal government, but from the state governments. That's been one of the interesting things is I've learned about Australia versus the UK versus the United States, is that Australia is almost more in line with the U.S. because of federation, where West Australia has its own regulations. Well, guess what? If I'm transporting say radioactive waste from Virginia out to Texas for disposition, I have to meet the Department of Transportation regulations for the United States government, plus Virginia, plus every state it moves through, plus Texas,
Yep.
right? And so that provides an additional challenge. Now, there is some benefit of being a nation with 50 states, is that if there is a state that's not viable on, I can maneuver up around it or down below it, depending on how you want to do it. You don't maybe have that same benefit in Australia, but also when you're looking at moving something from South Australia to West Australia, you've got to meet the federal policies, South Australia and West Australia, because you're all connected. Yep. So, there are interesting challenges where it does feel like, as I look at the regulatory pathways, it looks like Australia is more in line with the U.S. than is with the United Kingdom. But I think that
that's probably helpful.
Yeah, it's going to be a blended system, though, the United Kingdom system versus the U.S. system. From how the regulations work in the United States, I like to use stop sign versus give way signs. So the United States, we have stop signs everywhere. You come up to three-way intersection, there's going to be a stop sign there. You just roll through it, go slow. There's always going to be some, police officer that's going to be there. He's going to throw you a big old ticket. Failing to stop at a stop sign is like a giant ticket in the U.S., and that's our regulatory policy. We're just going to come in and beat you because you didn't know that you didn't stop when you were supposed to. That's the U.S. policy. UK policy is the giveaway sign, right? You come up there, there's a giveaway sign. We kind of allow you to make your own determination. If it wasn't safe, then the police officer is going to tell you suck, right, and give you a ticket because you were unsafe. But it's more along the lines because at 2 a.m., right? Really, let's if you come rolling slow, there's no one there, right? There's no one there for 5 kilometers, right? Is really rolling that stop sign in the U.S. going to cause someone to be unsafe? No, we're about beating someone down because you didn't follow the rules. So, and I would hope that the design is that there are certain things that Australia will say, hey, if you don't follow the rules in this, we're going to beat you real hard because these are the really key things. But these other ones like take a calculated risk with nuclear safety in mind.
Yeah, okay. Marky, what about safety? What sort of PPE do you need when working around a nuclear reactor?
And then last day I was qualified on the fire brigade. I think fiery is the term that you use. So I wore, we call them firefighting ensembles. I wore the whole uniform.
Much like this?
Yeah, just like that.
Like this.
Just like that. Yeah, with the helmet. Although the U.S. helmets are a little different.
Are they?
Yeah, they are. We're like the more traditional old school firefighter because we just can't get rid of the old school. We can't modernize it.
You got to keep a little bit of history, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. Some guys still wear leather hats even.
Really?
Yeah, it's a big popular thing amongst firefighters. But yeah, so we have that, and we got the whole hood, and you're wearing the fire protection, right? And I've actually fought fires underway on ships, as well as at the power plant. We had a truck that was driving through the parking lot, burst into flames, and like burnt up the whole cab and the engine compartment. Although, interesting fact, the glove compartment, everything inside it was protected because it was closed. No oxygen was able to get in there. Wow. So, which I thought was a pretty interesting fact. Yeah. So when you go into the plant every day for PPE, you got to have your hard hat, you got to have your safety glasses, you got to have your hearing protection, right? It's loud noises, environment. The other thing is that we have to wear all natural fibers because electrical shock, right? You get that arc flash, and you don't want that stuff to melt to you. We actually are not required to wear safety shoes just because of the security requirements. It becomes difficult to get steel-toed boots through if we're going to be operating the covers that we put on for if we're going to be rolling gas bottles. The other thing is that if we're going to be operating, say high voltage equipment, we have these. We always call them
the space suit.
Yeah, space suit. We call them beekeeper suits because these big, thick, heavy suits that you're wearing, right? And you got to have this big mask on so that big, heavy rubber gloves with these leather gauntlets over them, so that in the event that an arc were to occur during that breaker, that's no different than working at any power station. There's even commercial places to do that. We also sometimes may have to wear a steam suit if we're dealing with steam environments, and these are pressure fed so that if you're in a major steam environment, you're not breathing in hot steam and burning your lungs. Again, those type of things exist at any kind of steam engine based power plant. But what's interesting though is that that's not how we protect ourselves from radiation.
And so, what are you wearing when working around a nuclear reactor?
Yeah, so this would be kind of similar to the PPE that we wear. These are Tyvek paint suits. So you'd have a suit that you'd have a hood you'd wear. You'd have be covered all the way with one giant overall suit. You actually have cotton gloves with rubber gloves over it, and then cotton booties with rubber over that as well. And then you actually have a cover for your hard hat that you wear. The purpose of, we call them protective clothing, or if you make them yellow in the United States Navy, they're called anti-contamination clothing. Yep. So we call them chicken suits in the.
We call them sperm suits.
Yeah, sperm suits. Yeah, I mean, I don't understand. But the purpose of this equipment is not for radiation protection. It's for managing radioactive contamination. So think of it like if you're in a room full of dust, right? You got if you blew flour and you see how the flour rains down. So one of the big things in nuclear reactors that things are become radioactive that are all over the place. And so it floats down, it's going to land on you. And the whole purpose of this is to, when I leave the area, I can pull all this material off, and I make sure that the public doesn't get exposed to that radiation, right?
And
So
how does that work?
So literally, we just have big bins that we throw this stuff in. The materials that the commercial industry uses in the U.S. are actually designed to be dissolve in hot water. So like near boiling water, they'll dissolve. We can then filter out the radioactive constituents. They're biodegradable. And then literally they discharge the water. They cool the water back down and they discharge it. And then literally the suits become fish food.
And so that low-level radioactive waste, you would send, if you in Australia, you would send to Sandy Ridge, wouldn't you?
That's
what Sandy Ridge is for.
Yep, that's what Sandy Ridge is for. Right now, Sandy Ridge's limit on what they can accept radioactive waste for. I'm assuming that the Australian Submarine Agency is going to work to get them licensed for accepting the low-level waste.
Yep.
So now there is a difference between low-level waste versus your high-level waste. So the high-level waste is, or like people like to call nuclear waste, right? This is the spent nuclear fuel, gently used fuel, gently loved or previously loved fuel, however you want to talk it. There's debates on how we should refer to this stuff. So from a commercial reactor, about 5% of the energy is used from that fuel in the United States. We talked about the big Bunnings warehouse. Yep. So about 5% of that energy is used. We still have about, over 95% that we could still use. The ENSTO reactor produces that kind of waste, or that kind of material. It's then shipped over to France, where it is recycled. They take all the plutonium and uranium out of it. It gets put into whether it's mixed oxide fuel, which several countries use. Uranium is put back into reactors for commercial, and then you have your fission products, which at that point, once you're done to fission products, that's mid-level waste. Yep. And so intermediate level waste. And I believe that Sandy Ridge is capable of storing that material. I don't know if
we'll have to ask Nate.
Yeah, that's a Nate question.
Nate on the show.
Yeah, that's a Nate question.
Debunk some of these myths. So the French taking our waste and then recycling it effectively, aren't they?
Yeah.
Right? So they're recycling it. In Australia, we call that sustainability. Sustainability, hot topic. So if you've got nuclear waste and you're able to do that, that's surely a tick or a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it is. And actually, there's two companies, Oklo and Lightbridge, are partnering with the United States to start recycling processes in the United States. So, which I think is really great, is that the United States is now getting into the recycling nuclear waste recycling business. Awesome. The other thing is, and this is a very WA focused item, is that the nuclear waste from one of these submarines that is coming out. So we have the wheelie bins we put out for me it was today, Thursday.
It was actually Tuesday for us.
Yeah. So one of those wheelie bins, is the amount of nuclear waste you're going to get from a submarine that lasts for 33 years of operation. Yep.
So it's not much, I think people might think there's just fields and fields and fields of nuclear waste, but for the energy consumption versus what you've got left over as used fuel.
Well, and one of the things is that especially I know when talking with Nate, he talks about how much waste is required to operate your lives. So if you were to use uranium, right? The uranium that we pulled out of the ground that was refined into uranium oxide to go into a nuclear reactor, not even enriched, right? So U.S. reactors use enrichment up to about 5% enrichment. If unenriched uranium using current reactor designs, you would need one soda can's worth, right? So one Coke Zero sugar can. Yep. That's the amount of uranium you need for your life.
I saw a post the other day on Jonathan's page on LinkedIn, and it was a beer can, and it was, I think it was for the United Kingdom, how much it was a beer can of or Coke can equivalent of that's how much uranium you'd use in your entire life.
And when you get into the advanced designs that say are the fast breeder reactors or fast reactors as they're known, so right now we're using 0.7% of the uranium that we mine as an energy source. So these fast reactors that can use the 99.3%. So now imagine that one Coke can is now supplying not only your energy needs, but your children's children. Like you're talking multi-generational. And that's where the recycling comes in, right?
For sure.
I mean, I think I did a calculation. It's like somewhere between like 3,000 and 5,000 years worth of energy if we converted 100% of the U.S. to nuclear, just in our spent nuclear fuel inventory.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Mate, you and I could talk for absolute hours. Thank you so much for coming in and spending the time with us. I'd like to actually get you back to co-host a couple of episodes if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Awesome, mate. Thank you. Well, everyone, thanks very much for tuning into another fun episode on The Gold Room. Mate, thank you very much for coming and spending the time with us. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Not a problem. Tune in next time. Don't forget to comment, like, and ring that bell.